Okay, so now you contracted with Elmore Garrison, am I correct? To do the writing of this book, which you were researching.
Yeah, beginning in January, I collected up the materials from the Gilman Hot Springs property.
Several boxes of material.
Right.
This was in 80 or 81?
80, beginning of 80. And then shortly after that, I moved them to Los Angeles, and I began to add to them. I traveled around, traveled up down the West Coast, and I bought collections, other people's collections of other materials. I interviewed a number of people whose other living relatives.
Oh, was ever Junior?
Yeah.
His ex-wife?
Sarah
No, I didn't talk to Sarah. I talked to Sarah after that project was over.
His daughter, Alexis?
I
Alexis?
spoke to her as well sometime later. I spoke to his living aunt, living uncle.
That must be something.
Yeah, it's good. It's good, and they really saw him for what he was as well. I mean, they knew him in a real manner, and they knew that he was a big storyteller.
Now, at this time, you're going around talking to these people, and I presume verifying his various degrees and his education credentials, etc. And you're starting to see holes in these stories, right? At this point, it's still 1980, are you going, whoa, this guy's full of shit, or are you going, oh, something's wrong here, or... I mean, I know so many people within the church, despite the fact that these claims and these intros for these books and L. Ron Hubbard's past, and he's been killed 3 times and come back to life and born of a virgin mother, whatever the hell it is, they consider that these things are in fact true. He was a war hero, he did have these degrees, and that the government or the conspiracy against Scientology has gone in and altered all these information. You know what I mean? It's like to continue their own delusion of what was what. Now, at this point in 1980, were you still buying the story, or were you concerned in terms of the validity of any of that?
There were a couple of steps in the process. Initially, I just collected the documents. Then I began to see discrepancies. And although I saw discrepancies, I continued to believe that what he was writing about himself and what he had been saying was the truth, and that the discrepancies could be explained in some manner. Additionally, if there are only a couple of discrepancies, and they're minor discrepancies, who cares? But through the process of the accumulation of the biographic archive, through my study of them, I began to see that it wasn't just a few isolated instances, but rather that lying had been his pattern, and that's what was true about him. What was true about him was that he was a liar, and that he appeared to think that he could lie with impunity.
What lies did you see specifically, if you could enumerate a few?
The ones which were significant to me were the ones, I think, which had been used to draw me into the organization, and which had kept me in the organization for all that time. And they were not just used for that, but used to create a mystique about him which you could not penetrate, could not question. They were significant ones. That he had been crippled and blinded during the Second World War. That he had cured himself with Dianetics. That it was a matter of medical record that he had twice been pronounced dead. That he was a nuclear physicist. Those, to me, significant representations I was able to show his own documents, not the government's documents, but documents which he maintained in his own archive, that they were false.
Gerry, how did you feel when this came to light? I mean, you're a loyal Sea Org member. You have worked for the last 10 years as a Sea Org member, working night and day, very hard, giving your all, complete dedication, sometimes 16, 18, 20 hours a day. How did you feel when you began to find these things out and it began to dawn on you that this man was a bigger liar than he was a purveyor of truth? This must have been a devastating thing to go through. You were loyal. There was probably no person any more loyal than you. You were one of the loyal Sea Org members.
Well, it was initially, like I say, I just noted the discrepancies and carried on with my work. There came a time when my mind began to open. I began to see, and I began to question. And that period of time was also a period of great confusion. There was also a period of time of some loneliness, because there really was no one to talk to, because I couldn't go to someone with a critical thought. You could not talk and say the things that I had to say inside the organization. Then there came a period of time in the fall of 1980, and I actually had tried a couple of times. I'd gone to Laurel with some discrepancies, because Laurel had been his public relations officer for many years. She knew the story, and I was saying, Laurel, this isn't true. We can't say that. Well, she got really angry at me and silenced me. And so I learned to not say anything. But there were a couple of points. One of them was contracting with Omar Garrison. And Garrison had written a couple of very pro-Scientology books prior to my coming on the scene. Although he was not a Scientologist,
He was a huge ally.
he was a huge ally. So again, even with Garrison, I couldn't just say, hey, Omar, check this out.
I'm connecting the dots, and it's scary.
Right. No, it was a gradual thing with him too, and I would give him material, and then we'd talk about it. And gradually I began to see that Omar understood, and Omar was an ally of mine. So we began to be able to talk freely. And that was another key to my getting out of the organization, was spending a lot of time with him, with his wife, traveling around the country in different situations outside the organization, and then going back into the organization and having that comparison all the time, where you do, having the knowledge that I had going into the organization and seeing the craziness inside, and then going out of the organization and seeing that the representations the organization was making about the outside was another aspect of the big lie which was being run on us. But toward the end of my existence inside the organization, and also as I learned more, I became, I guess, braver and braver and braver, willing to stand up. It didn't matter anymore. You want to kick me out of this organization? See you later. But I was still there, still dedicated, so I developed something of a cause during my last few months inside the organization of attempting to get the organization, and of course I knew it would get to Hubbard, and it was sort of a challenge to him, but initially to get the organization to change what it was saying.
I remember that part very well.
And I critiqued a number of the dust jacket material and the about the author sections of the various books, and we'd go through them line by line and say, this isn't true, this isn't true, here are the facts, this we don't know, we can't document that, it sounds like bullshit to me. And So I did that with a number of pieces, and I think it actually had a good effect up to a certain point, because they did actually change them and tone down some of the hyperbole.
Now, didn't at that point you also feel, this is from my recollection, because I was up here at that time and worked pretty close to Laurel, didn't you feel that despite the fabrications and despite the inconsistencies, that there was still value to Hubbard? I think I recalled something about Gerry said that we could still do a biography and just make it truthful and still, because LRH had contributed so much, just do a truthful thing. And his contributions would stand on their own. You didn't need all this fabrication. And you sort of had platformed this campaign, right? Which went over like a pregnant pole vaulter.
Right, right. It really, I think, ran his accomplishments, and the technology will have to stand on its own. If it's going to stand, it has to stand on its own. We can't hold it up with lies. And that's the way I still feel about it, and I think it has fallen on its own. I don't think that it's workable, and I think that it's an enforced technology, but that's sometime later in my development.
Now, by this time, you and Terry were no longer married, and you had remarried to Joyce Brown.
Right.
And was your relationship with your wife at the time, where you were very vulnerable and feeling alone, was that any solace to you?
Yeah. See, she came along in
another catch, dude.
I mean, she was such a doll baby.
Yeah.
She is such a doll.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart. Initially, I'm working away on the biography project, but she's up there in SMI, Scientology Missions International, and we connect, and you know what a Sea Org romance is like, you know. Hey, got a weekend free, let's drive down to Tijuana, get married, you know, that kind of a thing. I think I drove her down one week and got her a divorce, and the next week got her married, or sort of. But she was in much the same situation as I was, in that if you're free to talk to anyone inside the organization, then for one thing, the organization wouldn't be Scientology. If people were free to talk, it wouldn't be Scientology, because that's the essence of Scientology, is its lack of freedom. But we, at one point, came to this realization that we could talk. So just toward the end of our being inside the organization, we formed something of a conspiracy of two. And so, knowing what we knew, and once I knew that I could talk to her, and once she knew that she could talk to me, and we formed this little conspiracy.
It really wasn't a conspiracy, though. It was open, honest communication.
Between a husband and wife.
Right, open and honest between us.
But within the organization, it would have been a conspiracy.
But conspiring to not let the organization know, because they say you must talk open and freely to this sect checker, but you can't talk open and freely to your spouse. That's the organizational paradigm. So we violated that, because when it came to sect checking, it was, and she had to go through a sect check toward the end of our Sea Org experience. And by that time, I mean, once you know that the whole thing is a scam, anybody can con a sect checker, because you have a certain altitude. Go ahead and ask a question. I don't care. You know, it doesn't read. There's no more belief in that meter. It's a pack of garbage.
Are you saying that the e-meter is not 100% effective?
The e-meter is, at best, a worthless, anti-religious artifact.
Thank you.
Don't sugarcoat it, honey. Give it to us straight, okay? I mean, you don't know this pussy around, so.
You feel pretty strongly about that, don't you, Gerry?
Yeah.
No, it's irrelevant. It has no meaning. that have no value whatsoever.
I think the value that it has is the value that the person holding the hand has.
Infuses into
places upon it because of what he's been told or shown.
That's not the value. There may be some value in answering questions. There may be some value of looking into one's mind. And
I agree with what you're saying. I'm saying the value that it has to the organization, not to the person.
oh yeah, it has the same kind of value that thumb screws had in another era.
Yeah.
Now, Gerry, when you had all these documents and you had these boxes, did you not come across a lot of evidence in terms of not only inconsistencies in the fabrications that L. Ron Hubbard had presented to Scientology as a whole, but also things that made his past actually questionable in terms of maybe alcoholism or drug use or things that you came across that not only showed him as someone who had made up these things, but showed a man who was the antithesis of what had been presented.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I began to see that his drug of choice in his later years was steroids. And he dosed himself with massive doses of testosterone. And I remain convinced that that is what he used to keep an edge on his belligerence.
Interesting.
How did you come to find that out?
From his own writings.
Is there any way that we could look at those writings?
I don't know of any way of getting to them at this time.
Why? I know it's a simple question, but why?
Because the organization will not disgorge the true information which it has on Hubbard.
Do you think they've kept that information, or do you think they've destroyed the information?
Both. So that there is certain aspects of what they've done and the criminal activity that they're involved in, which they maintain. And there are certain aspects of it which they destroy.
When you say the criminal activity they're involved in, do you think that the majority of Scientologists have any idea that that's going on?
A current Scientologist?
Yeah.
No.
Of course not.
Then,
When you talk about the majority, the people at the top, no.
like David Miscavige and Norman Starkey and...
Yeah, and Gene Ingram, sure. The people who control Scientology, and the lawyers. Oh yeah, the Earl Cooleys of the world, sure. They absolutely know that they're involved in criminal activity designed to destroy civil rights of the members of the organization and the lives of anyone they perceive as enemies.
Can you give me 2 examples of civil rights that Scientology has violated?
Freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Just to name a few.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, thanks, because
Gerry, keep going.
that sort of thing I think is important. Most people don't realize that that's what's going on. Most people have no idea that that's going on. Did you feel like you were manipulated while you were in there?
While I was in there, I don't recall that subject of manipulation crossed my mind. I don't think I could have allowed myself to think that I was being manipulated.
Did you ever feel that way?
I felt absolutely controlled. But an understanding of the manipulation, the coercion, comes later.
After one pulls back and views it from the outside.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically I was inside,
Yeah.
but I had really begun to deprogram myself. And so
Did you tie
part of
yourself up? We all know about deprogramming. You get tied up and...
Sexually molest yourself.
Did you tie yourself up and sexually molest yourself?
No, I mean, deprogramming, I think, has to do with that subject of manipulation. While you're programmed, you don't know that you are being manipulated. When you're deprogrammed, you realize that you have been manipulated.
So in order to be deprogrammed, one has to be programmed.
Yeah.
Deprogramming doesn't work on somebody who hasn't been programmed.
I think that's true.
Yeah, I would think so too. I would think so too.
Accepting the word and the definition.